We've asked Elder Quentin L. Cook from the Quorum of the 12 Apostles to provide an introduction to Rabbi Soloveichik. Elder Cook was sustained as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on October 6th, 2007. He was called as a general authority in April of 1996 and served in the Second Quorum, First Quorum, and presidency of the 70. Native of Logan, Utah, we're so grateful that he can be here this evening with his lovely wife, Mary. They're the parents of 3 children. I don't know how many grandchildren, but you can tell us that. Please join me in providing a warm BYU welcome to Elder Quentin L. Cook.
I'm very pleased to be here this evening, and I'm honored to introduce my longtime friend, Rabbi Meir Soloveichik. Rabbi Soloveichik is a remarkable leader in these difficult times, and he's a personal friend. He also represents the significant bond between the Jewish faith and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we're very grateful for that. As has been mentioned, well, let me say first of all that Rabbi Soloveichik is affectionately known by his friends as Solly, and that's what I refer to him as, and I'm grateful. He is the rabbi of the oldest Jewish congregation in America, Congregation Shereth Israel, founded in 1654. Rabbi Soloveichik is also the director of the Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought, and a professor of Judaic Studies at Yeshiva University. After earning his rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University, he earned a PhD in religion from Princeton. His research and teaching interests include Jewish theology, philosophy of religion, and the American founding. He's going to combine those for us this evening. His essays have been published in everywhere, New York Times, the National Review, Wall Street Journal, First Things, and even in our Deseret News magazine. In 2018, he was awarded the Beckett Fund's Canterbury Medal for Religious Liberty. He and his wife, Lealiza Soloveichik, have 6 children. I'm particularly grateful for my personal relationship with him, which goes back many years. Visited him as he was just beginning in his rabbinical efforts on the Upper East Side. He's on the Upper West Side at this point. And then I was with him and a delegation that went to Jerusalem in 2016. A large number of our Jewish friends wanted to have 175th anniversary of Orson Hyde dedicating Jerusalem for the return of the Jews. And so we went, and Solly was there, and Bob Abrams, 4-time Attorney General for New York, and Senator Lieberman, who we miss, has passed away, and many others, and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was even then the Prime Minister, and had a wonderful visit. But the genesis of that was that our Jewish friends wanted to go to Jerusalem and celebrate Orson Hyde's 175th anniversary of dedicating Jerusalem. And I thought that maybe the best thing that I could do is just say a little bit about the genesis of that. I think we understand that well, but it ties our theology, not just a friendship today, but our theology from the beginning with the Jewish people. The first temple that was dedicated was the Kirtland Temple, and that temple was prayed over and sacrificed for, and was finally dedicated on March 27th, 1836. The prophet Joseph Smith said that he received revelation with respect to the dedicatory prayer that he should offer. There's much in that prayer that is important to Latter-day Saints. I'm going to skip all of that. I'm going to go to verse 61 and read to you just a few verses that make it very clear with respect to our theology. This is Joseph Smith praying in the Kirtland Temple dedication. But thou knowest that thou hast a great love for the children of Jacob, who have been scattered upon the mountains for a long time in a cloudy and dark day. We therefore ask thee to have mercy upon the children of Jacob, that Jerusalem from this hour may begin to be redeemed, and the yoke of bondage may begin to be broken off from the house of David, and the children of Judah may begin to return to the lands which thou didst give to Abraham, their father. A remarkable prayer by the prophet Joseph Smith that has seen fulfillment and given many years before anything transpired in that regard. Now, we have a lot of fun, and my secretary said that I had to throw up one picture here before I let and give a little bit of maybe a different view of Solly than I've just given you. I love this picture of the two of us at Rabbi Soloveichik's congregation Sharith in New York City, and I feel that the image captures our religious and institutional connection and also the deep joy of our personal friendship. But I can't help but saying that he's known for the hats that he wears, and he convinced me that the place to buy them was in London. And so about a year and a half ago in July, I was in London with my grandchildren, and I went to this cap store, which was originally founded in 1680. Is that about it? And I took them in there, and there wasn't a single hat that was under 300 pounds. It was just nothing. And I was wanting to buy a hat for my grandchildren, and there were these incredibly expensive hats. It had they make the bowler that in the Bond that the hat that was really a lethal weapon in that, and my grandkids liked that, but that was outrageous. But I can't believe it that I got this cell phone call, and who was on it? Solly was on it. Here I am in the hat shop where he buys his hats with my grandkids, and he calls. It wasn't on that. It didn't have anything to do with hats, but I did mention to you, Solly, you must have an oil well or something under your under your house of worship there in New York if you can afford those hats. But so I couldn't help resist, and my secretary thought I needed to send that to Sharon. His hat's around here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but in all seriousness, again, we are so privileged to have you here. You're a dear friend. You're accomplishing so much. I loved in the prayer that was given, mentioning your family. Your great uncle is really the rabbi, and probably as knowledgeable the Talmud as anybody. Your family has that history. In the whole Jewish world, your name and your great uncle's name are well known and appreciated, and you bring your own personal scholarship to this important subject. We spoke together in Notre Dame on religious freedom. You're committed to religious freedom. You won the Canterbury Medal from the Beckett Fund for your efforts in religious freedom. Please welcome Rabbi Soloveichik.
Well, I'm incredibly honored to be here. I want to thank my dear friend Elder Cook for his incredibly kind words. It is true that though we usually see eye to eye on everything, I was a little chagrined that you didn't buy any hats in the hat store. Elder Cook said to me, he said, "How could you spend so much money on a hat?" And I thought, you and I have very different priorities. It's such a joy to spend time with you whenever we're together, be it in Jerusalem or New York or in Salt Lake City or in Provo. And it's just wonderful to spend time with you here again this evening. I want to thank the rabbi for his very gracious and eloquent invocation. I want to thank Paul, and I want to thank Emily Reynolds, and to all of Wheatley for the invitation to come back here to Brigham Young. And I want to thank the president of Brigham Young for spending time with me today and for giving me the privilege of getting to know you. And please God, next time together at a football game. I'm very excited. And thank you to all those from the church leadership, my friends, both old and new, that are here this evening. It's really my honor to speak to you and to speak to the incredible students of Brigham Young University. In 1956, Cecil B. DeMille, Hollywood director, gave us the 10 Commandments. At the time, the most successful movie ever produced in America. I have seen the film 40, 50 times, maybe, because I really like the 10 Commandments. The movie. I mean, I like the actual 10 Commandments too, but I really like the movie. And I know a lot about the trivia concerning the movie. For example, does anyone know who actually gave the voice of God during the declamation of the 10 Commandments in the movie The 10 Commandments? Does anyone know? Very excited to tell you here, because the answer was Jesse DeLos Jukes, and I'm quoting here from an article, a Latter-day Saint known for his amazing bass voice, was chosen to perform the uncredited voice of God in the film. Jukes sang in the Tabernacle Choir in the 1920s and was a soloist with the choir. And by the way, the same article that I read noted that DeMille had his premiere of the 10 Commandments in Salt Lake City because of his profound friendship that he had with church leader David McKay. And so it was actually here in Utah that the film was premiered. So that's one piece of trivia. Second piece of trivia. From where did DeMille get the stone tablets that were utilized for the filming of the 10 Commandments? The answer is that much of the movie was filmed not in California, but actually in the Sinai Desert. And DeMille went to the site that many believe was the location of Mount Sinai and actually had 2 tablets carved from what he believed was Mount Sinai itself. This leads us to our third and final trivia question. What happened to those tablets of the 10 Commandments after the movie was finished, after production wrapped? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is that Cecil B. DeMille came back to Los Angeles and he bequeathed the tablets of the 10 Commandments from Sinai to Mount Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. And in fact, he actually had them affixed to the outer wall of Mount Sinai Hospital. So this way, the 10 Commandments and the tablets of the 10 Commandments would quite literally be on Mount Sinai, okay, which makes sense. However, that was in the 50s or 60s. But ultimately, Los Angeles' culture, this will come as a shock to you, got less and less biblically engaged. And the hospital merged with another hospital, there was an earthquake, and the tablets were put into storage. Until just a couple years ago, where I read in a news article about how the art curator of Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles was doing an inventory on the hospital's modern art collection, which is apparently quite large. Why a hospital needs a modern art collection, I'm not sure, but apparently they have a very large modern art collection. And suddenly there in the archives, he came upon something that was anything but modern. He came upon these 2 stone tablets, and he realized he had discovered this important ancient artifact from the movie The 10 Commandments. So I noticed this story because, I really like the film. And soon after that, I received a call from the Jewish chaplain at Cedars-Sinai Hospital asking me to come speak, much as an invitation I received here. But Los Angeles is far from New York. It's not like Salt Lake City, which is close, okay? So I don't really like to schlep, so I wasn't sure I wanted to accept the invitation. Then I said to the chaplain, wait a minute, don't you guys have the tablets from the 10 Commandments? And the chaplain said, yeah, and if you come, you can hold them. So I don't know if we have the picture. I don't know if the picture's up, then we may not have it. But, there we go. Pretty great, right? Okay, we could take it down because I'm really good looking in this picture, so we don't want people to be looking at that the whole time. Okay, so this was one of the great moments of my life, as you can imagine. But as I held those tablets in my hands, I pondered an era not long ago when the Exodus was so celebrated that stone from Sinai with ancient Hebrew letters would be publicly affixed on a prominent hospital in the city of Los Angeles. And this actually embodies how, at the moment that the Ten Commandments was released, it was seen by many Americans, including American Jews, as an actual embodiment not only of a biblical tale, but of an ethos that lay at the very heart of America itself. Indeed, this belief was reinforced in the film's prologue because, unlike if you watch it on video, when they went to see it in the theater, and there used to be a curtain on the screens. Who remembers that? And the curtain rose, and actually Cecil B. DeMille walked out onto the screen in front of the movie audience, and he said to them as follows: "Ladies and gentlemen, this may seem an unusual procedure, speaking to you before the picture begins. The theme of this picture," he said, "is whether men ought to be ruled by God's law or whether they are to be ruled by the whims of a dictator like Ramesses. Are men the property of the state, or are they free souls under God?" And then he said, "The same battle continues throughout the world today." The point, in other words, was that the Exodus story was not just an ancient and true story, though of course it was that. Not just a story about the founding of a covenant people, though of course it was that. It was also a story that deeply inspired America and all that it represented. And the truth is that this belief, this link between the Exodus and America, goes back to the very heart of the American founding and to the warm welcome that Jews received from America at that very founding. This is the story I want to tell to you today. It's a story that's special to me because, as was mentioned, I'm the rabbi of the oldest Jewish congregation in America. We don't like to talk about that except pretty much every day. The story of the American founding, as Elder Cook mentioned, is something of deep interest to me. And I'd like to tell you this story by describing the interaction between George Washington and the American Jewish community. Some of you in the audience may have heard of George Washington's letter to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island. Very famous letter. George Washington visited the Jews of Newport. The Touro Synagogue, an old synagogue, is still there, as I like to say. Maybe George Washington visited the synagogue, and if he was there in the synagogue and heard a sermon from the rabbi, then they can put up a plaque in the synagogue which says, "George Washington slept here." So, but the truth is that, and we will see the Newport letter, but as wonderful as it is, there is a little known earlier letter from Washington to the Jews of America, and that's even more incredible, much more instructive. So in seeing the story of George Washington and the Jews, we will learn not only about the uniqueness of religious liberty in America, but also about how America saw itself, and therefore how we should see our present moment, both when it comes to the Jewish future in America and for the future of America itself. So we begin our story of Jewish correspondence with George Washington with an amazing man, a German Jew by the name of Jonas Phillips, who arrived in Charleston in 1756. He was also a member of my congregation, FYI, oldest Jewish congregation in America, and he married a woman that he met there. Jonas Phillips and his wife, I am not making this up, had 21 children. Jonas Phillips was literally American Jewry's founding father. With the British converging on Manhattan, Jonas Phillips and his congregation, deeply devoted to the patriot cause, chose to flee. Or as one history of my congregation put it, they fled, quote, across the plains of Harlem and Washington Heights. First through New Jersey, but the British keep coming because, let's face it, being chased by the British is really the only good reason to go to New Jersey. Okay? Anybody from New Jersey here in the audience? As we say in New York, if you want to know why we're so depressed in New York, it's because for us, the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey. Okay. Anyhow. So he fled to Philadelphia, and there the Jews of my congregation founded another community, which is still there, Mikveh Israel, the hope of Israel. Jonas Phillips stayed in Philadelphia, where he became enormously successful, good friends with prominent Americans, including Dr. Benjamin Rush, a confidant of both Adams and Jefferson. When the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia in 1787, Jonas Phillips wrote a letter to the president of the congregation, George Washington. It is this extraordinary letter that we will now see. The purpose of Jonas Phillips' letter was to complain. And this was the only time in Jewish history that a Jew complains. And the reason why he was complaining is because it was effectively forbidden, according to Pennsylvania state law, for a Jew to serve in the state legislature. So he decided to write to the Constitutional Convention. And this is right here. You see it at the top in your handout. Okay? From Jonas Phillips to George Washington, President of the Constitutional Convention. And he began. And by the way, one of the greatest things about old letters is people didn't have to obey these tyrannical spelling rules that they have now. People spelled however they wanted. That was freedom, okay? With leave and submission, I address myself to those in whom there is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. They are the honorable personages appointed and made overseers of a part of the terrestrial globe of the earth, namely the 13 United States of America and convention assembled. The Lord preserve them. Amen. Not bad for an immigrant from Germany, by the way, to put this letter together. And so then he says, it's not fair that we can't serve in the legislature, or as he puts it in the third paragraph, that all men have a natural and inalienable right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience and understanding, and that no man ought or of right can be compelled to attend any religious worship or erect or support any place of worship or maintain any minister contrary to or against his own free will and consent, nor can any man who acknowledges the being of a God be justly deprived or abridged of any civil right as a citizen. And it goes on. This is a very long sentence. Okay, so he's again complaining there's a violation of his civil rights, and then he goes on to say, and look what he writes in the final paragraph here in your handout. It is well known among the citizens of the 13 United States that the Jews have been true and faithful Whigs. That means patriots. And during the late contest with England, they have been foremost in aiding and assisting the states with their lives and fortunes. They have supported the cause, have bravely fought, and bled for liberty, which they cannot enjoy. So let's pause for a moment to ponder the audacity, or to use the technical Latin term, the chutzpah, that Phillips is exhibiting here. Here you have a friend of the Founding Fathers. He's successful, wealthy, accepted, embraced. Certainly much better off than my ancestors were in 1787 in Lithuania, okay? So he just couldn't serve in the legislature if he wanted to retain his fealty to Judaism. But Phillips is audaciously arguing that if he cannot simultaneously serve his country in the civic realm while openly maintaining his fealty to his faith, then he was not truly free. Because at the essence of freedom, and the essence of American freedom, he was arguing, is the ability to be part of a general society while remaining dedicated to what makes us different. It was my great uncle, Rabbi Joseph Soloveichik, wonderfully referenced by the introductions of me, who argued that to be a Jew in the world, and really this is true of what it means to be a person of faith in the world in general, to be a Jew in the world, he argued, is to embody Abraham's introduction of himself when he sought to buy a burial place for Sarah. In Hebrew, Abraham said, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. I am a stranger and a neighbor among you. Stranger and a neighbor. What that means, said my great uncle, is that on the one hand, a person of faith seeks to be a neighbor, a citizen, a member of society, joining with others in building that society. But at the same time, we recognize that our faith sets us apart. And we seek to be both simultaneously. It is just such a society for which Jonas Phillips fights here, and this can be seen in the most striking and least noticed aspect of the letter, the way in which he dates it when he sends this letter to the Constitutional Convention. Look on the top right. He writes, Philadelphia, 24th Elul, 5547. What is that? That's the Jew. It's exactly 2 days from now, Rabbi. Okay? This is a week before Rosh Hashanah. That's the Jewish date. And then he adds, or September 7th, 1787. Who's he writing? There are no Jews in the Constitutional Convention. So he's writing, it's 24th Elul, or if you want the Gentile date, September 7th, I guess if you're interested, September 7th, 1787. But this is, he's writing to Washington. Washington has never heard the word Elul in his life, okay? But that's precisely the point. Phillips intends to emphasize that genuine equality means entering society, entering the legislature, entering the public square as neighbor and stranger, as an American, without in any way amputating one's faith from one's identity. Now, Washington didn't respond to this letter, but of course, the Constitutional Convention returned a document that banned religious tests for federal office, which is why Jews, during the debate over the Constitution, were so devoutly in favor of its ratification. Jonas Phillips' story allows us to understand the uniqueness of the Jewish experience in America and the uniqueness of religious liberty in America. People often think that what makes marks the Jewish experience in America was success. But the truth is, in the 18th and 19th century, Jews in England and in Amsterdam actually acquired financially much greater success. What Jews found in America was equality, not just as Americans, but as Jews. In England, Jews were not welcomed in Parliament until the late 1850s, 1860s, and only under great controversy. And in post-revolutionary France, which set up a rigid secularism, Jews could be neighbors, but as long as there ceased to be anything strange about them, because everyone had to be in the secular public square. This conception of religion in society is reflected in France to this day, where there are laws banning in public schools wearing of religious garb, and that has been and legislatures have advanced laws applying that to other realms as well. I believe the French Senate voted to extend that ban to public sporting events as well. In America, several years before there was even a First Amendment, Jews saw in the Constitution a promise about what America could be, why it offered them the opportunity to be neighbor and stranger. Thus it was that in 1788, when a parade was held in Philadelphia to celebrate Pennsylvania's vote to ratify the Constitution, Jonas Phillips's new Jewish community, a very wonderful Jewish community in Pennsylvania, though not the oldest Jewish community in America, participated in that celebration. And his friend, Benjamin Rush, reported that a scene that he saw at the parade was the clergy of the different Christian denominations, these are his words, with the rabbi of the Jews walking arm in arm. And Rush reflected that this was, quote, a most delightful sight. There could not have been a more happy emblem contrived of that section of the new Constitution, which opens its powers and offices alike, not only to every sect of Christian, but to worthy men of every religion. Now, Benjamin Rush was not the only eyewitness at this parade. A teenager attended it by the name of Naphtali Phillips. Naphtali Phillips was one of Jonas Phillips's 21 children. 21 children. By the way, whenever I read that story about them fleeing the British with 21 kids, I often think, thank goodness they didn't have those car seat laws that I have to deal with now as a parent, because I would never have gotten out of there, okay? It took me 8 hours to install a car seat. Naphtali Phillips attended this parade as a teenager and then recalled it when he was 96 years old, after the Civil War. So you have somebody who's alive after the Civil War, who probably remembers Washington. And he describes the parade, and then he concludes by describing the party that followed. He says, the procession proceeded from about 3rd Street near Spruce northward toward Callowhill Street, then wheeled toward Bush Hill, where there was a number of long tables loaded with all kinds of provisions, with a separate table for the Jews who could not partake of the meals from the other tables. And Phillips actually tells us that on that kosher table was soused salmon. That's lox, basically, okay? So first of all, you got to love that the 96-year-old Jewish guy remembers precisely what was served 80 years ago at this party. But think of this, a kosher table at a party in the streets of Philadelphia, 1788. You can't imagine that happening in Europe in 1888, let alone 1788. And a resplendent symbol of how Jews were welcomed as part of the civic and social fabric in America, as Americans, but also uniquely as Jews, simultaneously as neighbor and stranger. But it was not only the Constitution that truly signaled to the Jews how welcome they were in this country. And here we come to an amusing, though embarrassing aspect of early American Jewish history. Constitution is ratified. George Washington is elected president, sworn in New York, first capital of the United States, in April of 1789. Soon after Washington was sworn in, the various minority communities in America, religious communities, each send Washington a letter because they want to congratulate him, but that congratulations is a way of ascertaining their future equality in the new polity. So all the Baptists in America got together and sent Washington a letter. All the Catholics in America got together and sent Washington a letter. All the Quakers in America got together and sent Washington a letter. The Jews in America could not agree who would send the letter, so they sent him 3 letters, okay? And George Washington, who was a gentleman, what Jews would call a mensch, he was probably wondering, why are these crazy people keep sending me letters? But he responds to every single one. There are maybe 1,000 Jews in America. 3 letters. And thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for that. Because each response is striking. And we will see 2 of them. The first correspondence was not from the Jews of Newport, and I'll explain why in a moment. The first correspondence came from the Jews of the Hebrew congregation of Savannah, Georgia. And by the way, by the time the Jews got around to sending the first letter, they sent it in June of 1790, over a year after George Washington's inauguration. And they actually began their letter by saying, "We're sorry our congratulations is so late, but we were in such awe of you that we couldn't get our act together." This is what's known in technical terms as a lie. But it was more that, the Jews were not organized. Then as now, there's no chief rabbi in America of the Jews. So they just didn't have their act together. And so they sent them this letter. And they wrote to George Washington saying describing how impressed they were with the Constitution and the equality that it afforded. And George Washington responded in kind. And he writes, and here, let's see this letter. "Gentlemen, I thank you with a great sincerity for your congratulations on my appointment to the office, which I have the honor to hold by the unanimous choice of my fellow citizens, and especially for the expressions which you are pleased to use in testifying the confidence that is reposed in me by your congregation." And then in the 3rd paragraph, he focuses on the Constitution. "I rejoice that a spirit of liberality and philanthropy is much more prevalent than it formerly was among the enlightened nations of the earth, and that your brethren will benefit thereby in proportion as it shall become still more extensive." This is wonderful, and Washington could have ended here. He could have just said, "I rejoice that you have equality here, and hopefully that will spread." Washington, of course, knew that even though this was technically a private correspondence, this was going to be made public. The Jews, when they get a letter from Washington, they're going to publicize it. Because let's face it, the Jewish definition of a secret is something you only tell one person at a time. Okay? So this is going to be publicized. Okay? So Washington could have ended here, but he doesn't. He ends actually with words of Torah, with references to the Bible and to the biblical story, and to the American connection to it. So if you look, just turn the page to the first full paragraph toward the top. Let's see how Washington ended his letter. And I think these are some of the most wondrous words in American history, in a letter that is little known. He writes, "May the same wonder-working deity, who long since delivering the Hebrews from their Egyptian oppressors, planted them in the promised land, whose providential agency has lately been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation, still continue to water them with the dews of heaven," meaning the Jews should be watered with the dews of heaven, "and to make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is And then he gives God's personal name in the Bible, which Jews do not pronounce. So in these several lines, which are incredible, Washington makes American Jewry not just welcomed, but embraced. What he tells them, essentially, is that the God who performed miracles for you, it is he who performed miracles for us in the Revolution. The God who saved you from tyranny and brought you to the Promised Land, that same God saved us from tyranny and gave us this land. Your story, he's saying, inspires our story. This letter reflects an aspect of the American founding, of how many founders saw in the Exodus story a symbol of their own covenantal nation. Thus, several founders, including Adams and Franklin and Jefferson, on a committee founded on July 4th, suggested that the seal of the United States be Moses and Pharaoh at the splitting of the sea with the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." And here Washington uses the Exodus image again. And this also reflects Washington's search for a religious language that could actually serve to inspire America. As the scholar Michael Novak puts it, Michael Novak notes that in a country which actually had a tremendous amount of religious difference, Novak writes, quote, "Practically all American Christians erected their main arguments about political life from materials in the Jewish Testament." And he adds, "In national debates, lest their speech be taken as partisan, Christian leaders usually avoided the idioms of rival denominations, Puritan, Quaker, Congregationalist, Episcopal, Unitarian, Methodist, and Universalist. The idiom of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was a religious lingua franca for the founding generation." We see that here in Washington's letter. Few pieces of early American writing embody this better than what Washington wrote to Georgia and its Jews. And thus this letter tells us not only about the Jewish experience in America, but about the way America saw itself. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of England and late and very much missed friend of mine, describing the relationship of the Passover story to America, wrote as follows: "It is, first and foremost, not a philosophy, but a story. It tells of how a persecuted group escaped from the old world and made a hazardous journey to an unknown land, to construct a new society, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Like the Passover story," Rabbi Sacks continued, he calls it Pesach, that's our word. "It defines the nation, not merely in terms of its past, but also as a moral, spiritual commitment to the future. Thus," he continues, "it is no accident that the founders of America turned to the Hebrew Bible, nor that successive presidents have done likewise, because there is no other text in Western literature that draws these themes, history, providence, covenant, responsibility, the need to fight for freedom in every generation, together in a vision that is at once political and spiritual." And he adds, "Israel, ancient and modern, and the United States are the two supreme examples of societies constructed in conscious pursuit of an idea." This is the meaning of the Washington letter to Savannah. Soon after, Washington visited Newport, August of 1790. The reason he chose to visit Newport then was that until recently, Rhode Island was not part of the United States because Rhode Island refused to ratify the Constitution. So George Washington was not their president. That was the first #NotMyPresident. That was Rhode Island. And they were known actually as Rogue Island because of that. And the Senate, I think, in early 1790 had actually drawn up like a bill of embargo on Rhode Island. And I would like to say, that had there been a great U.S.-Rhode Island war, I think we could have taken Rhode Island. So then they voted to ratify the Constitution, and Washington thereby came as a sort of reward. And so he came, and Moses Seixas, the lay leader of the Jewish congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, sent George Washington a letter. And he used language that Washington would make famous. He wrote to Washington the following, this is not in your handout: "Deprived as we heretofore have been of the invaluable rights of free citizens, we now, with a deep sense of gratitude to the Almighty Disposer of all events, behold a government erected by the majesty of the people, a government which to bigotry gives no sanction, to persecution no assistance." Those were Moses Seixas' words. Washington then, in response, assimilated that language, which many think was Washington's own words. But Washington adds a different phrase, which is very, very important. Here's what Washington writes. This is on the bottom of the page. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of. This is Washington's addition. As if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens. So Washington is assimilating Seixas' language while adding that in Europe they have, if they're enlightened, religious tolerance. But that means if you're tolerated, then you're not equal. In America, it is not toleration. We are all equal. Today, the Savannah letter is largely forgotten. Only the Newport letter is recalled and celebrated. But in truth, it's essential in studying the story of the Jews in early America for the president's two letters to be taken in tandem. Washington's words to Newport's Jews express the idea of American equality, for which Jonas Phillips fought. It expresses what the Constitution is all about, that we have the right to be strangers and neighbors here in America. But it is Washington's letter to Savannah that reminds us that the founders revered the Jewish story, sought succor from the Jewish faith. And this, above all, explains why Jews were not only received as equals in America, but were so warmly welcomed in America. And it also explains why so many Americans care about the future of the Jewish people today and care so much about the future of the Jewish state in the Holy Land today. It is, to quote Rabbi Sachs again, because, as I mentioned before, Israel, ancient and modern, and the United States are the two supreme examples of societies constructed in conscious pursuit of an idea. The story of Washington's letters is instructive, especially this year, as American Jews confronted the specter of anti-Semitism in certain realms of the United States. This has, of course, been a very difficult year for the Jewish people, especially, of course, in Israel. But in America, we have seen, on college quads and city streets, celebrations of those that seek to harm and destroy members of the Jewish people. We have seen this in some of the most enlightened universities in the land. And we have to understand what is at the heart of this manifestation of anti-Semitism. It is, of course, true that bigotry toward any community in America is un-American. But in understanding the current outbreak of anti-Semitism, we have to understand what is learned from the words that Washington himself composed. The deep and long-lasting bond between Judaism and the American idea. And that, in turn, allows us to understand that, rightly understood, the hatred for Jews that has been made manifest in America in some circles is not just bigotry against one group, which of course it is, but it also reflects a deep antipathy that many of these very same anti-Semites have for America. There are those that understand elementally that Israel, ancient and modern, is a profound source of inspiration for the way America sees itself as a covenantal people, a people with a destiny, an exceptional people dedicated to a set of ideas. And that is why, at many of the rallies that we have seen celebrating perpetrators, at many of the rallies celebrating the perpetrators of October 7th, we see the American flag being desecrated. Thus, what is reflected in these events, these troubling events of the past year, is not only hatred of Jewry and of Israel, but hatred of America itself. It is the notion of America as an exceptional, biblically inspired nation that is hated. And this means that the recent difficult year for American Jewry has larger implications. In one of my favorite books, David McCullough's magisterial biography of Harry Truman, McCullough describes how the vice president, Truman, was dragged away from his card game on Capitol Hill and brought into the White House. And he meets Eleanor Roosevelt in a room, and Eleanor says to him, "Harry, the president is dead." And Truman didn't actually stop to think about what that meant for him. He was just, trying to be nice because he was a nice person. So he said, "Is there anything I could do for you?" And Eleanor Roosevelt responded, "Is there anything I can do for you? For you are the one who is in trouble now." Since October 7th, I've received numerous emails, messages, from American faith leaders, including, of course, from my dear friends in this community, expressing their concern for solidarity with the Jewish people. The substance of the communication essentially is there anything I can do for you? And this is, of course, deeply appreciated. But my own reaction has been a desire to respond in friendship, that the danger is not only for Jews, but for all of us as Americans. We are the ones that are in trouble now, because targeting of Jews in American campuses and cities is a sign of a threat to the future of America, and a sign of a growing strength of those that hate the biblical way in which America has seen itself. It has implications not only for Jews, but for all faith communities who seek not only to live as strangers and neighbors, but to be part of a country that sees itself as a covenantal nation. George Washington famously concluded his letter to the Jews of Newport, and you can see it here on your letter, by writing in the final paragraph, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while every one shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." Unfortunately, this past year, the children of the stock of Abraham in America at times did have reason to be afraid. But there is still succor and inspiration to be found from a Jewry that has also shown incredible resilience and strength in the past year throughout the world, and from a vast swath of Americans that truly understand the bond between the Jewish and the American stories. The hope for the American future lies in communities such as this one, such as the community embodied by this remarkable school that still understands the way in which the Bible inspired America, the way in which America can see itself as a covenantal nation still. It's a visit to a school like BYU that gives me hope for the American future. For so many leaders here understand the covenantal culture that inspired the founding and how it can guide us in the years ahead. It's largely unknown that Cecil B. DeMille's 1950s film, The Ten Commandments, was actually a remake, because in 1923 he made a silent film version of the Moses story, filmed in the California desert. You can find this on YouTube. For his extras, DeMille hired 250 Orthodox Jewish immigrants. As one article describes, for them, this was not acting. This was natural. They were just reenacting the Exodus scene as they were filming it, because that's what Jews do every Passover, is reenact the Exodus scene. And so, I'm quoting the article here, describing the scene of the splitting of the sea, featuring the actor Theodore Roberts. So the article tells us, actor Theodore Roberts as Moses stood on a rock at the Pacific when an overcast sky interfered with the light DeMille was looking for. Suddenly, the article continues, the clouds cleared, bestowing a radiance on Roberts' face. A gasp went through the crowd, one spectator recalled. The faces of men and women reflected this light. Tears trembled on wrinkled cheeks. Sobs came from husky throats. For many, the world had moved back 3,000 years, and they stood once more on the shores of the Red Sea, viewing once more the good omen of deliverance. And the writer of the article, I believe, is Marshall Weiss, quotes the Hollywood columnist Jack Ungemeyer, who heard one of the elderly Jews in the cast say, "We know this script. Our fathers studied it long before there were movies. This is the tale of our beginnings. It is deep in our hearts." And Weiss concludes the piece by writing, many of these extras didn't even speak English, but for them this was more than a movie. During those moments, the American dream and their heritage converged. Those are Weiss's words. During these moments, the American dream and their heritage converged. In the end, that truly captures the gift that Jews have found in America. But it is also something that lies at the very heart of America itself. A bond between the Jewish and American stories that must be preserved. It is the embrace of that bond, which I truly feel whenever I visit BYU. And it is the preservation of that bond that will ultimately help preserve America itself. Thank you very much.
Solly, thank you so much. We're going to go till a little after the hour. We'll go a little longer than we'd planned because we want to hear just a little bit more from you tonight. And we have questions that have come from students in the audience. We'll try to get to student questions first, and we have some other questions as well. But I just want to pick up on where things sort of ended up here, where you're talking about the Exodus story. And I'm actually really curious to hear from you. You know, that theme is very strong in the civil rights movement.
Yes.
And what is the relationship between Judaism and the Black church in America today? What does that look like?
So I think we should start by noting that the image of the Exodus, of course, appears over and over in every advance of liberty in America. It's, of course, central to the abolition movement.
Yeah.
And it's central to the civil rights movement. And so that has always been central. That has always been central. In terms of the relationship between Jews and the larger community, I think different leaders, you will find a difference in different forms of leadership. There are certainly leaders within the Black church that have taken extraordinary stands for Israel. And that has been a source of great inspiration. But I don't know that I can make a universal statement about the current situation in America right now. What is clear is that is the role that this covenantal story plays in the advancement of the story of America. And the lesson is there's a wonderful book by the Yale law professor Stephen Carter, an African-American professor at Yale. He wrote a book called Civility. If you look in the book, it's actually filled with citations from Jewish texts. He also, side note, thanks my wife in the prologue, who was a student at Yale Law School. It's just a little bragging on my part. But, and he describes, if you want to see why he's so interested in Judaism, he describes how when his family moved to an all-white neighborhood in Virginia, there was an Orthodox Jewish woman that came and greeted them warmly. And that's forever changed his apparently his impression of the importance of not just Judaism, but of faith and its role as civility in a society, or its impact of that. And so writing about the civil rights movement and writing about this Jewish woman, Sarah Kestenbaum, who changed his life, the phrase he uses is he says, faith alone offers a justification for the equality that liberal philosophy assumes, but is often unable to defend. Those are his words, essentially. And that, I think, is the role that the biblical story of America is so important, why the biblical story of America is so important. I think that captures it.
I have a quick historical question. We'll get to these others. What do we know about the role of Hamilton in these letters?
Okay.
Because everyone loves Hamilton.
So I have a lot to say on this, so we'll have to stay for another 2-3 hours. Okay. Hamilton, first of all, there's a friend of mine who wrote an amazing book called The Secret World of Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was raised in Nevis, and he attended a Jewish school, whereas he describes he learned to recite the Ten Commandments in Hebrew. And then he served as the lawyer for the Jews of my community, because you may not know this, but my community is the oldest in America.
The oldest?
They were around at the time. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but and he actually represented them in lawsuits, in court cases, including an incredible one where they faced Gouverneur Morris. And Gouverneur Morris actually argued that Jews could not be believed under oath. And Hamilton gave this, and this was an appeals case, and in those days the appeals were not held before a Supreme Court, but before like essentially this massive legislature type system. And Hamilton made this incredible speech about what the Jews meant for civilization and for America, and he won. I wrote this up in a recent article because, of course, it struck me because one of the mobs that I mentioned at the end of my speech, of course, it was Hamilton Hall at Columbia that was ransacked and desecrated. And so, everything comes full circle. Yeah. So my friend Andrew Porwancho, who wrote this book, The Secret World of Alexander Hamilton, who actually theorizes that Hamilton might have actually been embraced by members of the Jewish community in Nevis, at least, as a member of their own community. And you'll have to read the book to see why this would be so. But he thinks that Hamilton played a strong role in Washington's letter to Newport. What is certainly true is that Hamilton played a role in Washington's farewell address, which also spoke about the importance of religion in maintaining a moral society.
Okay. Let me share a question here from a student in American Studies, Tayton Fuja. Tayton asks, how can we redeem, and he uses the small r, Republican, how can we redeem small r, Republican virtue in our nation given the large lack of morality in America generally?
So I think what has to be restored above all, if you study Tocqueville, what Tocqueville describes is that the essence of America and its health lies not in the individual alone and not in the state, but in what comes in between, what Tocqueville calls associations. Or as Tocqueville says, in England, if something needed to be done, the Lord would take care of it, the Lord of the city or the town or the area. In France, the state would take care of it. And in America, Americans unite. And it is communities that are formed on their own in America. Communities that have been created for religious purposes, for educational purposes, especially at a time when the rot in so much of the academy has been revealed. This is how change actually happens. In other words, change does not occur from the top down like that. That's not how things happen. That's never how things have happened in American history. The greatest movements in American history came not from first. There, of course, we've had great leaders, but it came first and foremost from the revolution onwards, of course, came from movements that happened within society. So we have to remember that one of the supreme Jewish virtues and one of the supreme religious virtues in general is hope, which is not the same thing as optimism. As my friend Rabbi Sachs used to say, optimism is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that if we work, we can make things better, which is a very different thing. Although I come from Chicago, and there we say, the pessimist sees the glass as half empty, the optimist sees the glass as half full, and the Cubs fan waits for the glass to spill. But be that as it may, no change in America will happen that way. Change in America happens through communities, educational communities like this one, like what Ben Sass was trying to build in the University of Florida, Yeshiva University community, and change will come with covenantal communities that are formed to preserve the traditions of those communities. That's ultimately, and this is not, no change is instantaneous. That's, I think, how change happens.
Okay. Courtney Rockwood, who's a student in economics from Colorado, she asks, how do you and how can we preach to the community inside and outside of religion the importance of both distinction in beliefs and unity in purpose as a citizen?
Yeah. So here again, I'm just going to quote Rabbi Sachs. And I was talking to the president about this. I mean, as Rabbi Sachs has noted, this is what lies at the very concept of a covenant. What is a covenant? A covenant means you are bringing people that are different together to achieve a purpose larger than themselves, larger than the sum of themselves. A covenant could be as small as a couple getting married, of course. But a covenant can also be an entire society or a polity. So Rabbi Sachs describes, and he told me this story, that he used to meet Prime Minister Tony Blair for Bible study. But in England, it's considered, you're not supposed to talk about faith if you're a politician. At least it wasn't considered that way. When asked about Tony Blair's faith, Blair's spokesman or advisor, Alistair Campbell, said, quote, "We don't do God." That's what he said. So Rabbi Sachs came in to learn with Tony Blair one time, and Tony Blair said to him, "Jonathan, I've reached the boring part of the Bible." And so he said, which boring part of the Bible have you reached, Prime Minister? So he says, the tabernacle does go on a bit, doesn't it? Okay, because for the Jews in the desert to build a tabernacle takes like 600 verses. God creates the universe, as Rabbi Sachs noted, in 34 verses. But as Rabbi Sachs put it, to build one synagogue in the desert takes 600 verses because, as he said, synagogues are built by committees, so it takes forever, right? Okay? But he says the larger point, of course, is that the reason why the story takes place and why so much time is spent on it, and the reason why the story of the tabernacle appears not in Leviticus, where we'd expect it to appear, where all the cultic rites of Judaism are described, but in Exodus, the political book, because the building of the tabernacle is a creation that actually helps not just create a dwelling place for the divine, but it actually helps create the people of Israel. Because what it is a creation out of difference. Some give one thing, some give another thing, some have skills. And the tabernacle represents what Rabbi Sachs calls integration without assimilation. Now, of course, biblical Israelites are all one faith. But what America takes from this, and what covenantal politics takes from this, is the possibility of creating a society out of difference without denying our differences, yet united in a larger cause. Rabbi Sachs calls that integration without assimilation. Mm-hmm. Integration without assimilation. It's taking people who can be both stranger and neighbor and joining them together. That is how America has understood itself. I do not believe, however, that if America loses entirely its connection to the Bible, then I actually don't think a covenantal politics is possible. Mm. To think covenantally, you actually have to have some connection to covenantal traditions and covenantal ideas. But once you have that, at least in some sense, then a community out of difference can absolutely be created.
Okay, that's beautiful. By the way, a lovely reference to that whole argument from Rabbi Sachs, and you and I agree on this, that this is his very best book.
Yeah, it's the best book.
The Home We Build Together.
Yeah.
Which actually focuses on Britain,
yes,
but has a lot about America.
The amazing aspect about the book is that it's like a modern Tocqueville. You have somebody from Britain, and to see ourselves through the eyes of outsiders is incredible. I always cite from what Rabbi Sachs said, that when he first came to America, I love this. He said that he came as a college student, I think, and he visited Washington, and what he noted was that the different memorials have not just images on them, but words. So the Lincoln Memorial has the second inaugural Gettysburg Address. Jefferson Memorial has the Declaration. He says in Britain, the memorial for David Lloyd George has 3 words on it: David, Lloyd, and George. And Churchill's memorial has 1 word: Churchill. Now, words were kind of important for Churchill. But what he says is, America is a covenantal society. It's set around ideas. And that's why there are these words. Once you know, I never noticed that. Once you notice it, you see it everywhere. So I traveled to Washington. They sell ties with the Declaration of Independence on them. I just flew in from London. Nobody's selling a tie with a Magna Carta on it. They're selling images, not words.
Yeah.
I have a coffee mug from Kensington Palace with an image with pictures of Henry VIII and his 6 wives. And when you put hot coffee into it, the 6 wives disappear. Okay? It's a cool mug, okay? But nobody's selling things with ideas.
Yeah.
But I had to see that through the eyes of somebody who was not American to understand the uniqueness of America.
Yeah. Great insight.
Yeah.
Listen, we've gone a little over time, and the audience doesn't know we've got to get you on a red-eye flight to Manhattan. Let me ask, there are few students that ask very similar question here, so let me read this one. And then when we're finished with that, we've asked Emily Reynolds, who's assistant director of Wheatley, to come and offer a benediction on this beautiful evening. So both, and I may pronounce this incorrectly, Muriel Cook and Serafana Pinto Haynes asked this very similar question. sometimes the issues that America is facing currently, especially regarding anti-Semitism, feel so large and difficult to tackle. What can I do? What can we as citizens of this country do what can we do as citizens of a country that feels so divided?
Yeah. So I want to stress, and this I mean very personally, you really have no idea the impact that you can make. Just speaking on the issue of anti-Semitism, which is of course not the only issue America faces, but because it was mentioned by the questioner, you have no idea what it means to American Jews to know that other people care about them and about their future. When I traveled I was in Sydney, Australia, and the questions you get is, how are the Jews of America? And that's because they see clips from the colleges. It's very strange, because American Jews are so used to being seen as the freest and most prosperous diaspora community on earth. My friend Dan Senor said that when he went to Israel, after October, but meaning 6 months after October 7th, they were in the middle of a war. And he gets questions like, how are the Jews of America? How are they doing? In other words, they're fighting a war, right? But this is what people see, and the concern is there. And so I said to them, there are worrisome aspects, I said to these Australian Jews. But you have to understand the wondrous age in which we live and how many people in America actually care about the Jewish people. And this is the critical point. Never before in the history of the Jewish people, and we're kind of old, never before has there been a time where just numerically there are more non-Jews than Jews that care about the well-being and future of the Jewish people. That has never happened. There are other miraculous aspects of our time in Jewish history, but those have parallels. There is a resurrected Jewish state, and it's wondrous. But the Jews have had commonwealths before. This has never occurred. You have people here and there that care. Cyrus, for example. But this has never happened before. And that means the world. If I had told an ancestor of mine that who lived in Lithuania 200 years ago, that a pogrom would occur and that pogrom would be celebrated in the quads of elite universities in the city streets, he would not have been surprised at all. That would have been de rigueur for him. But if I would have told him that I was going to go to Utah and speak to a largely non-Jewish audience about Judaism and Jewish history and to be embraced, he would then react in wonder at the age in which we live. And so even in darker times or more difficult times, or even precisely in more difficult times, there is where the sources of inspiration are more manifest. And so this has been a year of difficulty, but it's also been a year of inspiration in a variety of ways. And I'll just say to the students, never underestimate your ability to inspire. One act of inspiration can change someone's life, and that can redound in ways that you can scarcely imagine.
Well, your act of inspiration has blessed us immensely. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Rabbi Soloveichik.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.